Hedbor. Lars writes books set during the American Revolution, the 1765 era. In his 15 novels, articles, television appearances, and his first play, man, he's good. Lars shares stories of the American Revolution from New Hampshire to Georgia and a bunch of stuff. His characters take the readers into the challenges faced by the 13 original colonies seeking freedom from the British rule. We are pleased to have Lars D. Hedbor on the panel. Jan Foster writes historical fantasy books, many set during the 1485 era. Although Jan's work ranges from the Age of Vikings to World War II, she's best known for a Tudor fantasy series. In her view of history, forever is uncertain. And the phrase, trust no one, is a warning the characters in her thrillers live with every day. We are excited to have Jan Foster on the panel. Elizabeth R. Andersen writes historical fiction set during the Crusades, right around the 12 to 11 era. Elizabeth books feature historical figures and action events, all woven into a tapestry of edgier sea plots with rich and complex characters. Her books take you from the siege of Acre to a French king who used war on his own vassals to create an uncontested monarchy. We are honored to have Jan R. Andersen on the panel. Reading is fundamental, folks. I'm Clifton Slater, and I write military adventure books, future and ancient. In my ancient series, it's mid-Republic era, starting around 267 BC. In over 19 books, my character grows from a farm boy in Tuscany, which is the far north of the Roman Republic, to become a battle-hardened commander of a region. It's not an easy or direct path to where he goes. And it also is in the backdrop of the first war between Carthage and Rome. And I am your moderator. It's an honor to be your moderator for this. I am Clifton Slater. Gina, would you tell us about you, your series, and recommend a book?
All right. So my current series is on the American Civil War. I'm currently, put me on the spot, and I'm like, what? I'm finishing up the series now, writing the final book, so I would recommend the first book in the series, The Wicked North. I have a tendency of bringing all aspects of the war into the story plot. So it is historical fiction with a romantic thread throughout the entire story. It's a saga of two families and individuals of those families through this. And again, it's because Civil War is my favorite time period. It is my specialty on both my degrees and as a museum educator, curator, and Civil War reenactor. So, strongly advise the first book in the series, though I will tell you I wrote each book that if you were to accidentally pick up one of the other ones, which I am very bad about doing on anybody's series. Wow, I really like this. What else do they write? And realize I came in on book 3. So I write mine that if you were to pick up one of the other ones, you are not going to be lost.
So you got The Wicked North?
The Wicked North is book 1 and is probably a good starting point.
Awesome. Lars D. Hedbor, tell us about you and give us a book.
Sure. I am the most prolific novelist of the American Revolution with 15 novels in print at this time. What I'm working on doing is writing one for each of the colonies and some of the future states, and really trying to focus on the viewpoints and experiences of ordinary people, because Washington and Jefferson and now Hamilton have been done to death. And frankly, I think that what's much more interesting is what was it like to be somebody like you or I living through this revolutionary time. I chose to write about the Revolution because without denigrating the Civil War, I think that's very important in American history. The American Revolution was a pivot point in all of human history. There was a before and an after in human history for the American Revolution. It was really the first time that instead of arguing over which prince is going to rule over a patch of dirt, You have a basic argument over what should the nature of government be and what should the relationship between the governed and the government be. So that's why I write the Revolution. As far as which book I would recommend, because they're each set in a different place, you can pick them up anywhere you like. Each one of them is a standalone book. There are very small sort of Easter egg little cameos you'll sometimes get from one character who pops up in another book, but doesn't hurt you at all if you haven't read the prior book. I'm going to recommend of my 15, probably The Freedman is kind of the one that I feel most proud of. That's a novel that I got started writing after I came across a newspaper article about a former mayor in North Carolina who was doing some genealogical research, discovered that he had an ancestor who had been a former slave and chose to fight for the American side. And of course, if you have spent a lot of time with American Revolution history, you probably know that the British offered freedom to slaves who chose to fight for the British. I hadn't really heard about former slaves choosing to fight for the American side. And the thing that I found absolutely compelling about that story was that these people were not afforded any freedoms themselves, so they were fighting for liberties that they hoped that their grandchildren and great-grandchildren might be able to enjoy. And that, to me, is just such an important and compelling story to tell.
Fabulous. And that is The Freedman.
The Freedman.
Very nice. Jan Foss, tell us about you and your book.
I came from a drama background, studied Shakespeare, did all of that theatre stuff, and I fell in love with the Tudor world. It's quite simple, and for me it's the most exciting era that has really interesting larger-than-life characters that we all know, we've all heard of. It's an age of exploration, it's an age of discovery, it's an age of challenge. And what I like to do with my work is draw the parallels between what was happening then 500 years ago to what we see happening today, and realise that, you know, our history plays such an important part of who we are and how we're formed as a society. So that's why I write the Tudor era mostly. I also have a prequel which is Viking. Don't be me. Don't be me. Don't do a prequel that is 800 years before your main story. Don't do that. But that was a pure vanity project because I love Vikings. So there we go. If you have to pick a book, please pick Disrupting Destiny, Book 1, 1536, or 3536, in the dissolution of the monasteries. It's coming at the, well, everyone knows what happened with the dissolution of the monasteries, I think. So.
What was the name of the book?
Disrupting Destiny. Disrupting Destiny.
I can't hear what.
Disrupting Destiny.
Disrupting Destiny. Okay, everybody got that? Disrupting Destiny. Okay. Elizabeth, tell us about you and give us a book.
Okay, I have the loud voice, so can y'all hear me?
Yay!
So my name is Elizabeth R. Andersen, and I write about several different eras. I like to write about the end of the Crusades, when the Western forces were kicked out of the Holy Land for the good, more or less. And I also have a new series that I am starting. It's going to launch in January. That is a comedy about the Black Death.
Delicious. Absolutely delicious.
So that one, I would love to recommend that as my first book. Unfortunately, it's not ready yet, but it's called The Alewives, and it's coming soon. And so I really enjoy the current series, and I would recommend you start with The Scribe. I have a copy here because there is an Elizabeth Hunter who wrote a book called The Scribe, and people buy the wrong book. But it's a fascinating time of world change, of political change, and this book follows 3 point-of-view characters, and they all come from different levels of society, and it shows the siege of Accra through a series of 5 books. From their different perspectives. So I would recommend this one. And it unfortunately is not the type of series where you can just pick up book 2 or 3 and know where you are. I mean, I'll give you a little bit of introduction, but you really should start from the beginning on this one. It's cliffhangery. So that is what I would recommend.
That would be The Scribe, and Andersen's the key.
Yes.
And Elizabeth R. Andersen. Well, I'm Clifton Slater. I write military adventure, both future and ancient. So I have 3 rules of writing. It must be science before it's fiction, it must be history before it's story, and all action sequences must be choreographed. So if you can't tell, my books are action adventure based on my Roman Legion series. Mid-Republic Legion, not the Imperial Legion. I warn people because the Mid-Republic Legion was a part-time legion that was only seasonal. It was always headed by a council. So and there was only 4 of them, 2 per council. So if you want the Imperial Legion, you have to go somewhere else, but I will tell you, my guys are a lot of fun because it's a big mess at times. If I'm going to suggest a book, I would suggest The Clay Legionary, because that's the start of the adventure. I roll in a lot of the culture and the technology of the day, which is antique technology. I guess you guys have noticed we go from way over like 2,000 years of this, right? So again, for me, J. Clifton Slater, Clay Legionary would be the book you want to start with. Now, we have put together questions. We're going to go through our questions. We're going to split up the answering them. And in about 10 minutes at the end, we're going to take your questions. Unless we say something that just is a burning question for you, throw your hand up and we'll get to you right away. So we'll start with, this is Bernard Cornwell, is my favorite author, wrote The Last Kingdom, which is a Netflix series. He wrote Sharp's Rifles about Wellington against Napoleon, the Napoleonic era. He says he writes history as the background, it's rolling along, and then in the foreground, he's got his characters and the plot and everything that rolls with it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the way I write, but that may not be the right definition for historical fiction. Gina? Why do you call you Danna? Her cousin's named Danna. It's killing me. Gina.
Think about Gina Lollobrigida.
Gina Lollobrigida. Oh, I like that. That's a good reference. Would you?
Most of you all know who Gina Lollobrigida is. I run across a lot of co-workers who are like, who?
Age challenge.
Yeah. So.
What is the definition of historical fiction?
Historical fiction to me is actually I want to go back in time and I want to take you guys back with me. And when I take you back, it's not flourishing, flowery pictures. It is not, yes, in my time period, since it's Civil War, no, it's not politically correct. I paint the picture as it was back then. Through diaries, newspaper articles, church sermons, the way these people actually lived. And I used to be a college teacher too, so I want you to understand what happened then and why we are still dealing with this in this year, at this time. So you have to understand where these people and what was going through. Yes, he wrote about the Revolutionary War, which threw the rest of the world on their head going, what? These people are smart enough to do this on their own.
And we're back.
All right, so we survived. That was exciting. Everybody home?
We're all awake now? We're all awake now?
Yeah.
I think we're awake. How do you strike the balance, Janet? How do you strike the balance between ensuring that your characters remain true to modern readers while still remaining reasonably historically accurate?
Research. It's the number one thing that I've got. I use a lot of original source material where I can, and then with history, because oftentimes there's not a lot of detail about things. There's things that we know as historians. You can read a lot, you can watch TV and films and stuff for inspiration where someone else has done the research for you to get your feeling of a place and time. But you do have to make some educated guesses sometimes. making the characters ring true, I think the human condition is universal. And so what your job as a writer is to try and bring out those emotions that the characters are going through because of the setting or the period or whatever they're facing at that particular time, and make sure that you really expose those emotions so that your reader can identify with them.
Sounds good. Lars, how far should one go twisting the truth to suit the story?
Personally, I stick pretty close to the truth as far as we can know it. And that's kind of the crucial breaking point for me. In many cases, we'll know a lot, but there will be gray areas. And that's where, as a storyteller, I get a chance to start telling stories. But I do try to remain where the truth is known, or a version of the truth is generally agreed upon. I try to stick to that. If I violate that, I do tell on myself in the author's note at the end, because the last thing I want is for somebody to go, well, actually, in a review. You know?
Good. What, you're going to ask me that? J. Clifton Slater? What do you need to be mindful of legally with historical fiction and bending facts into the story? Pretty often, if you're writing about somebody who's famous and it's not that far back in history, you've got to be mindful that if you stray from knowing facts about the person, if you make somebody a horse thief when they weren't, if you call Paul Revere becomes a horse thief, you can have a problem with the Revere family, because some of those people are still around, and some of that stuff is copyrighted. On the other side of that, if you need to have them at a meeting that they never attended, and the people in the meeting do bad things, I think you're pretty safe ground. Just be mindful that if there is a family that's watching, I write in antiquity, nobody alive today, they can trace their history back, but there's nobody's going to be able to sue me if I make a tribute of that guy in one of the stories. So also, Ben, listen,
Yes.
why do you write in your era?
Why do I write in my era? So I think that everyone here writes in the era that they write in because they have a fascination with it. I mean, you get obsessed, you just can't stop reading about it, you can't stop researching about it. I was certainly like that, and I felt that, and I still do feel that when it comes to anything that's back in the middle or early Middle Ages before, so like our characters start to become a bit one-dimensional, and it's hard for modern audiences to really relate. And so I decided that I wanted to bring these characters to life in a way that they felt extremely real. And like Jan was saying, the human condition is the human condition. And people back then had the same emotions we have now. And so that's why I chose this particular time and place. I felt that I wanted to educate. The Siege of Acre was a very nuanced, but we in the West usually just get a really one-dimensional story of what happened. And so I wanted to educate, I wanted to bring a flat history to life, and I was obsessed with it. I was just fascinated. Yeah.
Works. If you don't love your era, you really have a problem if you write a successful series in this era. Gina, how do you incorporate technology of your era into your story?
Oh, and I have so much fun with technology in the era. Anybody who knows anything about military history, that's the time a lot of evolution, a lot of things evolve. I have a fascination particularly with the Civil War medical period. I did have a family member who was a surgeon during the war. And when you have his autobiography he wrote, and he was for the South, and he does claim he was the first one in this country to use general anesthesia, but the war came, and of course they gave it to some Yankee doctor. And it turns into a black rabbit hole of just going down and wanting to know. So somebody like me gets fascinated with all the fact that any of them lived through that war is amazing. I appreciate shows like Mercy Street that actually was demonstrating medicine correctly. And weapons, of course. Who went to war thinking they needed to fire weapons and do all the old protocol? His era did. Except now we have rifles, and they go farther, and they're more accurate. So the devastation of casualties was immense by military standards today. It would be awful. No, I don't recall the percentages. But anyway, I get to deal with all of that, and so I incorporate it big time.
Very nice. So Lars, what drew you to writing historical fiction in general, and your settings, and what drew you to the settings in a place at a particular time?
So I got started, I was talking to a friend of mine who had gone to school in the Carolinas, and he mentioned something about, some big thing that happened in the Carolinas during the Revolution. I was like, really heard about the South and the Revolution, it's all Civil War. And I asked him if he could recommend any good historical fiction set there, because I learned best from historical fiction. And he poked around, and he says, oh, it looks like Jimmy Carter wrote one. I said, oh, that's Jimmy Carter? He says, yeah. I said, well, I like his poetry. So I'll give it a shot. And I'm sorry, Jim, if you're watching. I got about 100 pages in and uttered the famous last words, I think I could do better myself. And so I started writing my very first book set in South Carolina because I realized that there is a whole story to be told here in the South in the fiction. Right from the start, I had this idea that if there's a story to be told in South Carolina, there's probably a story to be told in West Florida, there's probably a story to be told in Maine, and so I really wanted to explore all those different locales and how the Revolution played out across North America and beyond that.
Very nice. Yeah, I think most writers start out reading something and going, that was really good, and they read something else and they go, I can do better. And there we go, we launch it. Jan, unlike some genres where the author has to create an entire world, we have ours in existence. In what ways is this both a benefit and a challenge?
I can speak from both sides of this coin, actually, because I write historical fantasy. I do have a novel coming out which is set in the pre-post World War II series, which has shown me the challenges of writing just purely in one. My fantasy side of it is actually magical realism, so my creatures, witches, etc., live in the human world. So I'm kind of mostly within the human realm, but not totally, not 100%. So the challenge for, I think, any historical fiction writer is to bring that era to life, which means you have to be very, very accurate on everything. The words you use, the way the characters talk, they're picking up is it a glass, is it pewter, is it wood? Things, it's the little details that really immerse that reader in that time period, and that's what I think they want. It's certainly what I want. I pretty much exclusively read historical fantasy or historical fiction, the time period I'm writing in at that time, and I want to be immersed in the world. I don't want to just read about modern problems and things like that. I want to escape to somewhere else.
And any little detail that you get wrong is going to yank a reader right out of the story.
Absolutely, yeah. I do quite a lot of beta reading for other readers, other writers as well, of historical works, and you have to pull people up and you have to say, that's just not how it would have been, because your reader will notice it. And we're all passionate about our era, about the genre. You know when someone's getting it wrong, and it's excruciating because you just, sorry. So please just pay attention to the detail, and that will help bring it alive for your readers, I think.
Very nice. All right, Elizabeth, what does the readership for historical fiction look like? How does this affect our production and marketing approaches?
I think it depends on the era that you write in and the subgenre. So the kind of person who's going to be reading my heavy drama series about 13th century Palestine is not the same type of reader who's going to be reading a Regency romance. And so, naturally, I think that most of the marketing rules and tips that you're learning at this conference apply to historical fiction as well. But the readers of historical fiction are interested in learning about history. And so some of the ways that I have adjusted my marketing, because I have a marketing background in my other life, is trying to capitalize on the fact that people who read historical fiction want to be learning, they want to be educated, and they want to be immersed in a different world. So for example, on my TikTok channel, while everyone out there is lip syncing and being really hilarious and funny, and all the historical fiction authors are panicking because they're like, we can't do TikTok about history. Well, you actually can. And so I do 3-minute history lessons on my TikTok channel. And you can go to my channel and I will give you a whole lesson on the history of lemons and the history of almonds. I do a lot of food because people can relate to that. And people love it. So you just kind of have to really get creative and remember, a historical fiction reader is somebody who is intelligent and curious, just like you. And
Not to mention good looking.
and looking, talented. And so I would just take what you learn here and think about how you would relate to it as a person who reads historical fiction.
Very nice, very nice. Author credentials. Tell us, J. Clifton Slater, how much weight do readers give to the credentials of the author for historical fiction? It depends on the type of author, what the author does. I write pulp fiction, basically. My era, our characters are true as far as the way their lifestyle is and technologies. And the first, and that's my favorite, is finding the first gladiator, public gladiator games, the first female doctor of Rome, the first motor wheel that they built for this grinding thing. I love first. There was a lot of them in my era. But my credentials are, I was a combat veteran from Vietnam with a Purple Heart and 13 combat operations in my record book. I know war. Okay, so I write military fiction because I do understand what the people in a battle line are going through. But other than that, my degree's in American Studies with a minor, on the other side of that, for somebody like with Lars, Gina, and I think the other guys, if they go and they present to a historical group, I believe you, Lars, you have books in American Revolution.
I've done articles for the Journal of the American Revolution.
Yeah. So if you've got that sort of, if you want to go that track, then you need credentials, right? Like
I'm going to contradict you.
talk to me.
My credential is that I've studied this. I'd like to say I'm not an historian, but I played one on TV.
I love it.
Because my wife actually has a degree in history, so she gets a little irritated when I'm getting recognized for my historical knowledge. I have a high school diploma. That's it. Everything else is what I've learned from studying.
Perfect. Absolutely love it. Love it to death. Gina, how do you approach acknowledging research material in your work?
I would approach what? That's me. Technology?
Yeah. No. How do you approach acknowledging research material you use for your books?
Oh, yes. Well, I research a lot. Part of the audience I'm writing for know the war like the back of their hand.
Yeah.
So I also, because I'm also a member of the American Battlefield Trust, trust me, these people will come all over me like crazy. You did that wrong, this didn't happen. So my books often involve heavy author notes and bibliography of sources
You got
used
3 minutes until 10.
and how to contact me for further if you're interested. So to me it's vitally important because I don't want to mess it up. It's part of the tale.
Nice. Lars, do you portray your story as true to the period or more fluff?
I try to stay very true to the period, so I have a background as a linguist, so I'm very careful with the language that my characters speak. I am a passionate cook, so I'm always very interested in what they're eating and drinking, and trying to stay very true to that. Like you, there's a lot of new technology that's being developed during my era, and so I try to, people are very excited about the new technology that, of course, we look at and go, come on, everybody knows better than now, but at the time that was leading edge, and so I try to reflect that.
Very nice. Craig Martell says genre equals marketing. So let's delve into the murky waters of marketing historical fiction for a second here. So, Jan, what if you write, say, World War II, what is their chance that a reader from World War II will also read your historical fiction, your earlier gets really weird, doesn't it?
My personal experience of this is that people have their favourite time periods. The only reason I have written World War II stuff is because it was an opportunity to co-author with a fabulous author that I really admired, and so I learned about World War II. I did my research for it, and I think people have a favourite period of time that they read around in that period of time, and they kind of don't deviate from it. I'm sorry to say I've never read any of my colleagues, but I read your book. It's not because it's not interesting, it's just not what I know. But I will read every Viking book going, and I will read every Bernard Cornwell book going. And I think when you're marketing, you have to remember that's your reader. If you read like that, then that's how you have to go and find those readers.
Very nice.
Where do they hang out?
Elizabeth, how is marketing historical fiction distinct from other genres, both in its challenges and its unique opportunities?
So I have a background, 15 years in tech marketing for the top 5 tech companies. So I know marketing. And I made the mistake of thinking that because I had that background, it would be really easy for me to market historical fiction. Because it turns out historical fiction is not software, and they're really different. They don't have a lot in common. And so I think that, like I had mentioned in my last answer, the principles are the same, but you have to know who your audience is. In the case of my books, my audience, they're people who are interested in, like Jan was saying, I'm probably not going to get a lot of World War II enthusiasts reading about the end of the Crusades. And so I have to really put myself in their head as a consumer, not just as the writer. I have to find out where they're spending their time, and what types of other content are they reading, what podcasts are they listening to. I want to reference those podcasts and those places that they're at in my social media. I want to be in the social media channels that they are in. There are not a lot of them in TikTok. There are some younger ones that are in TikTok. Yes, it's happening. It's happening. But I've had a lot of success on Facebook, where I didn't expect it, because in tech marketing, Facebook's kind of, not really where you'd go. So you just have to figure out where they are, and then just remember, like I said before, they're intelligent people who are curious. Don't give them a bunch of fluff. They want to learn something. So give them something that's valuable, something that's shareable, and just something that is not always talking about your own work. Teach them something in your marketing. And if they're intrigued, they'll come find your work.
Thank you. Now, you may think it's time for J. Clifton Slater to answer the question, but it's not. It's your time. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
How long are your books, and how long does it take you to write?
Okay, I'll start off with that one. Because I need to get it right. And I do know a lot about the war, but I don't know a lot about the war. And every time I move, I have a friend who yells at me saying, "That's all your weight sitting in those bookcases." At any rate, it can take up to a year to write it. Mine have it, and I started laughing over, oh, it should only be 60,000, 80,000 words. Mine run about 500 pages. So I will take you in, but I've never gotten, to my knowledge, anybody saying, you know you're going to split these into 3 books or something. And I pull you in. You have to tell the tale right. That's what I need.
I write during NaNoWriMo. Mysteriously, my books all seem to wrap up right around 50,000 words to 55. Right when I hit day 30, and I'm done. I do continue to work on them throughout the year after that. And typically, what I'll do is I'll draft it in November, and then I'll set it aside for a few months. So if I forget
one a
about
year?
it. Yeah, one a year. Set it aside for a few months, so I forget it enough to be able to go back and read it fresh and see what I didn't get on the page that I had in my head, and then proceed through the production process.
I write 2 to 3 a year. That's about as much as I can manage, averaging about 120, 130,000 words each.
So I'm about 2 or 3 a year, but I might start the research for that book 2 years ahead of time. We can't rapid release. We just can't. I mean, really, unless you have a doctorate in the era that you're studying, you can't rapid release historical fiction easily. And so,
Well, you could if you stacked them all up and then
Yeah.
did them all in one
and I
go.
tried that with the first 2 in this series. I actually did that, and the problem that I encountered is I'm working on book 4, and my readers are hammering me and saying, "Where's book 4?" It's been like 6 months. So you have to be careful with that, I think, too. This is 365 pages right here. It's about 95,000 words. And I try to keep this series around this size. And my new series, the Alewives, those are going to be between 50 and 70,000 words each.
My books are right around 75,000 words. I do 3 to 4 books a year. What I do is my characters are set in a year and a half. So I do heavy research on what happened before that year, what's going on during that year, and what happens after that year, so that I can write the story in the book. I'm also a full-time author. I work 7 days a week. This is the only week that I will not write. I can't, like, people run into a room and go, I'm going to crank out some words. How do you do that? I have no clue. So you can write a lot of books in historical fiction if you set yourself up to always researching when you're writing. But it's a lot. It's 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And the guy that asked the question, by the way, is T.R. Harris, who's a science fiction author that has 53 novels. And he's made
8.
58 novels, and you've made, what, $1.2 million as of later?
1.4 million.
1.4
Come on.
million. So if you wonder about who would ask questions and who would come to a seminar about things, no matter how good you are, how popular you are, there's always got to be learning in this business and trying different things and learning about new things. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to comment. I remember reading actually a book my brother gave me called Citizen, and it was about common people in Rome. I used to call him up when I was kind of depressed or whatever and say, Andrew, tell me, he knew everything about Rome. I said, tell me what did women wear in Rome? And he would say, under one emperor. Okay, so I learned really early. I write historical fiction during the Depression.
Good.
So I learned really early that that line has stuck in my head. Under what emperor? That tells me everything about the specificity.
Ancient Rome, I get hammered in my first books because Rome lasted for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So when somebody says, I write Ancient Rome, you have to know what emperor, what season.
Right.
I'm mid-Republic, 200 minus.
What part of what geography?
Yeah,
Where,
what geography within it
setting.
as well. So it's all of that. I'm sorry, did you want to comment on that? They don't want to talk. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk about the editing process, how long it takes, how do editors, proofreaders, and if you don't mind sharing, how much does it cost?
I can take that one. I made a really big mistake in my first book by hiring an editor who was not a specialist in historical fiction. But she was like, I think I can do it. And she was affordable. I think she cost maybe like $500, which was a lot for me. But I had to have this book re-edited because of the massive amounts of problems that happened from A, hiring an editor who was too affordable, and B, someone who was not a specialist in historical fiction. So what I do now is I have Grammarly, and when I'm done going through my first and second and third and fourth and 12th and 25th drafts, I run it through Grammarly, and then I send it off for a developmental edit.
If you guys want another 10 minutes, you can have another 10 minutes.
Oh,
Okay,
thank you.
Sorry, say, I can't.
We have another 10 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yeah.
Shoot, we got questions.
Yeah. Do
So there's a company, I'm going to plug my editing company for a second. They're called the History Quill. They are fabulous. They're based out of the UK, and they are a company that specializes in historical fiction writing. At the History Quill, I have my editors there that are dedicated to my individual series. I have a developmental editor who specializes in mystery that happens during the Black Death, and that's what my next series is, a mystery, comedy mystery that happens during the Black Death. They have they have list building services that are just for historical fiction. So if you want to promote your book to people who are actually going to read it, instead of maybe getting blasted out to a really wide audience, but a much more narrow audience, History Quill has those lists. They have reading clubs, they have book clubs, and they have multiple levels of editing, which run based on the word count around $1,200 per book per service. So it's not cheap, but the quality is fantastic. They make a style guide for every book that they edit of yours, so that if you take it to another editor, that editor can look at the style guide and know exactly what they're dealing with, and they will correct any historical mistakes that they find in your books.
Does anybody else want to jump on that? No? Okay. Any questions? Yes, sir.
How important is it that your editor is knowledgeable in your era? Is it at all?
I answered the last one. You guys want to take that?
Well, it does help a lot. The editor I use is she's very well educated. Her degrees are English lit, but she writes Regency. I have been known to write Regency at one point, and so she'll read my book. She goes, "Okay, that's very Victorian." That's not what they would say, or So from that standpoint, it's good. Though, you always have to watch it anyway because, you always make sure it's edited. And what Lars says is really good about walking away from your book. And I used to do this when I was teaching too on your research papers. Walk away for at least a week. Then go back and read it with eyes, and you'll sit there going,
I had it in my head, it didn't make it into the page.
yeah, actually, I did. I went through 2 books that, because I was naughty, I was really bad. I got back edited, had it formatted, did a huge scan read because I'm like, I'm done. Let's just get this moved on, get it on out. And I got these reviews, and I'm sitting there going, And my editor's like, but it was good. It was really, and so I yanked him and went, OMG, and re-edited both books because I caught stupid errors. And so to this day, I go through and I will reread these books. And yeah, they actually run about 127,000 to 177,000 words to make sure I don't do that again.
And there's like anachronisms that you have to really, really watch out for that someone who knows the period can find. And I'm going to use my book as an example because I found anachronisms I had put in there. For example, when someone is shooting an arrow, you don't fire an arrow, you shoot an arrow. You don't fire it because you didn't fire anything until there was something to fire it with, some fire. So we don't have that term until guns came along. Well, I went back in my book and did a little little search, found fire here, fire there, and I was horrified. And yeah, I think that if I had it with this one, if I had an editor who really, really understood this era, probably would have caught that before I had to go back a year and a half after it was published and find all the fire and pull those out.
For me, I have the word okay in dialogue.
One of my editing tips is this. It's very simple. I have on my phone called an app called @Voice, and I can PDF send the manuscript to my phone. Then I play it back and listen to it as I read along with it. And I'm looking for, because I learned it from T.R. Harris, is flow. Readers will look over any kind of really minor mistakes, any kind of things like that, if they get in the flow. Because remember, our job is not to teach history. Our job is to take somebody and drop them into an era and give them a smooth ride through rough history. Right? I want somebody to pick up my book. I've had people write me and go, "Oh, that book was really in-depth writing." And other people read, "That was really short. I finished it in 2 days." Because the flow is what we want, especially for younger readers. They're used to having things like there. And if you make them stop and think because of rough passage, you can lose them halfway through the book. So that's my thing, is always listen to your books, even before they go to the editor, and find those rough spots. More questions, comments?
Jan, if you want to write out of the Tudor period, you have to build a whole new audience.
Yes. Sorry. As I said, well, yeah.
All right.
I have a problem. I have a disjunct between the Viking lovers and the Tudor lovers. So I know I have this problem. I have solved the problem with a forthcoming release in the next year. But yeah.
It's something you live with.
It's something I live with, and I think I'm very lucky with this co-author book that's coming out next year and the World War II one, because my co-author is already very well established in that era. And yeah, she does pull me up on things like okay and stuff like that. So, it's a new audience, but that's okay. I'm not scared of the challenge.
Lars, after you finish the 13 states, what are you going to do?
So I've already written 15 books, so I've got a problem there already. I'm going beyond the original 13. So I've already written West Florida, I've written Maine. Vermont was an independent republic. They told everybody to take a lead. And right now I'm writing Bermuda, which was a British colony where there was a major incident that contributed to the war. After I'm done though, and I've probably got another dozen books or so to write about the revolution, my next plan is to explore early America, so the early republic. So about 1815, so after the War of 1812, up to about 1850. Because again, I don't want to encroach on Gina's era.
All mine.
Right. Yeah. But I think that's another fascinating era in American history that there's not a whole lot of fiction that's been written about it.
Will your audience carry over, you think?
I don't know. We'll see.
And so, yeah, here's one for you. So I do the Civil War. I also have ancient Rome.
Okay.
What era of ancient Rome?
I'm dealing with about 0 to 100, 150 AD or CE as they're now going by.
Yeah, but
But
you're getting into
Trajan and
emperors and
yeah.
all that. Yeah.
So, yeah, and I have a muse that these are the two eras, and it is confusing because the History Channel did a whole thing on the Colosseum, and I'm like glued to it. And my muse is going, yeah, there's that third book you had started in that series. And I'm like, shut up. Because it finishes the one that I'm currently writing, which is dealing with 1861. So, like, the play deck in my car goes in between Gladiator and Bob.
Bottom line, if you change, you're going to have to build a new audience.
Probably. But that doesn't discourage me.
Which I ran into with, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think it depends on how drastic the change is. So I'm moving forward about 60 years for my next series. Yeah, it's not that much. It's a different century. I'm moving from the 13th to the 14th century. But I'm going to take them with me. I'm going to give my audience, my email list, my audience an opportunity to opt into marketing materials that are more tailored for that time in that series. And if they want to come, they can. And if they don't like it, I will watch, see what they do, and then I might segment them. So I think it kind of depends. If you're going from Rome to Tudor or from Rome to Civil War, I don't think you can take them with you.
And you can probably write some short stories or something to bridge
Exactly,
and
yeah.
get people from one to the other.
Yeah.
So Gina brought up an important point. She mentioned the Colosseum in Rome. When writing historical fiction, you can go on Google Maps and see the general area. But be careful, because my era, the Colosseum wasn't even a dream. They still had the Severn Wall up, and it was maybe 500, maybe 100,000 people that lived in Rome at the time. So the Rome I write about has some brick structures. I had one scene. I wanted my character to walk down the temple, Venus's temple. Right? I'm sorry, the Vestal Virgins, the Temple of Vesta. And I looked at the ruins and I thought, this is going to be awesome. That was built during 101 AD or CE. My character had to leave what was virtually 500-year-old thatch and mud barn. Is where the mysteries of the Vestal Virgins were in there. And he just walked out, and the place stunk. That's the only thing they
That
said.
brings up a really interesting point, and that's, a lot of people say you have to go visit the place where your book takes place. For me, like you, I find that there's been so much change since the time that my book is set that that's actually going to it's going to mislead me. So I try to find contemporary descriptions, drawings, maps, and so forth.
But you would have the weather, you'd have some.
Yeah, you
Not
can get the weather,
necessarily.
although you have
But you also have climate change that goes
Yeah.
on.
Right.
Rivers that were rivers are now just streams.
Yeah. So I want to address more of the business side of historical fiction. Because I'm used to a different genre. So one of the things is the genre that I write in is mainly series, and the historical fiction I've done is just more like a standalone, but I'm going to add it more like to a theme. So how many of you write series, and how many of you write under a theme? And then also, can you address kind of the pricing in historical fiction compared to maybe other genres? That's a lot of questions.
We
Sorry.
have an issue. We just ran out of time.
Yeah.
Come on, you can go. Yeah.
Great questions, yes.
We are out of time. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to tell you, this is